Hey everybody, Called on here with another VOX Immortalis commentary guide. This video is for Heroic Majordomo Staghelm, and this is Firelands and 10-man. The heroic version of this encounter is very much a DPS check with a lot of severe healing requirements as well. But as the gear and experience improves on this fight, of course the DPS requirement will drop, but this will also severely boost the healing ability because of the new mechanic throughout the fight, which I'll explain in a moment. But as it stands now, if you're in appropriate gear to be attempting this fight on Heroic for the first time, you'll probably find that meeting the DPS requirement to beat Berserk is very challenging, which is our experience. So that said, I'll explain sort of our transitions as they occur early on here, and then I'll go back through and explain the overall mechanics and why we chose to do that. So we're starting with Scorpion, and like normal you can see Flame Scythe is hitting most of the raid that were stacked up. But if you see in the grid, there's actually a Warrior Mage and our Death Knight that are not getting hit by the Flame Scythe. And this is because they're specifically not stacked with the group. This is due to the new mechanic on Heroic called Concentration, which is a stacking sort of energy buff. It's alternative power. So if you look to the right of my character, you can see a red number climbing up. That's my concentration. And this climbs on every player pretty quickly, but it will reset to 0 every time you take damage. However, for every 25 concentration you gain, you get a stacking buff that increases damage and healing by 25%. However, it only occurs at intervals of 25, so if you have 10, then you're not going to get any bonus, and if you have 40, you'll gain 25% bonus, basically. So those three DPS, the Warrior Mage and Death Knight, are staying out of the Scythe so that they can hold 100% concentration bonus throughout the phase. Otherwise, you may notice we use cooldowns at 6 and 8 adrenaline stacks, and then we transition out of the phase at 9 adrenaline stacks after that 9th Scythe. So we're into the cat phase here, and you can see we've got 3 raid markers. Those are pretty much our healer assignments, and then we have our range spread out in a circle between. And this is just the best position we found so that when a leap occurs on one player, they can simply sidestep to one direction and not have to move forward or back. So this maintains our distance, which increases our DPS and, of course, healing stability as well. Other than that, we're only going to use 5 total adrenaline stacks for the cat phase before we transition back to Scorpion. And the reason for this is that, like I mentioned, the DPS check is very high on this fight, and through a lot of trial and error and analyzation of logs, we found that our effective raid DPS on Majordomo was quite a bit higher during the Scorpion phase than the cat phase. And even though you would think that fewer people are taking damage and thus concentrations are higher overall during the cat phase, which is true, because you have these spawns, these cat adds, every time he does a leap, then you're actually wasting effective raid DPS dealing with those rather than attacking Domo. So in the end, it was around 30,000 or so more raid DPS for us to focus on the Scorpion phase than the cat phase. So instead, like I said, we do a 9 stack of adrenaline on the Scorpion and then a 5 stack on the cat. Because a cat ad will spawn every time he leaps during that phase, then as the leaps occur more frequently, as the phase goes on, the DPS requirement continues to climb up to actually defeat the cat ads in time. So at some point you hit this plateau where it's no longer viable to stay in that cat phase, and instead you should go to Scorpion. Another common strategy is a more even split of 7 adrenaline stacks for Scorpion and 7 for cat. And this is, again, similar to our setup in that by the end of the 4th cat phase, you will basically be reaching around the 10-minute mark of the fight. And if you hit that 5th Scorpion phase, you probably will wipe because the Stacks of Fury at that point with the Flame Scythe is going to one-shot most low health targets without major cooldowns. So really that's sort of your hard out. You want to plan to have the fight defeated by the time you hit the end of that fourth cat phase, assuming you started with scorpion. If you did it backwards, if you start with cat, then it would be at the end of the fourth scorpion phase, obviously. In any event, by doing a 9 and 5 split, we reach that 10-minute mark just around the end of our 8th phase overall. 7 and 7 is very much the same, so it's a popular strategy as well. So anyway, during the second scorpion, you saw we had seeds. So our main setup, rather than have 3 people out full time, because you have seeds, you at any given time will have 2 people with seeds going in and out of the raid. And this means you can only afford to have 1 permanent person outside for concentration bonus while seeds are active. So we have our mage outside, and everyone else is stacked with seeds transitioning in and out. Once the seeds are complete, then we have our other 2 DPS, our warrior and death knight, step out again for concentration, just to boost our damage a little. One important note about the seed phase is that it's important that players not step back into the raid until they're fully healed if a flame scythe is about to occur, because the seed does do damage to you, and obviously if you are not full health and a scythe hits you, you may get destroyed instantly. So just a minor tip there. Other than that, we used 1 cooldown at 6 again on Scorpion, and then another 8, and then we transitioned out. So much the same as the first phase. So we're back into Cat, and again, we'll just go to 5 stacks and go back into Scorpion. Pretty simple. This is really a regeneration phase for healers. There's very little damage if you're doing low stack count at this point. So once we go back into Scorpion, as our 3rd Scorpion, the Fury stack is high enough that we can't afford to have 3 people out. We need only 2 people to be out of the raid for concentration. So we tried 3, but we just couldn't handle the healing, and with poor luck on resists for the Flame Scythe, there's a good chance that someone will be one-shotted by the damage. So again, I think we have our warrior and our mage stepping out at this one. Yeah, and you can see how severe that damage is. I mean, our Death Knight was down to 7% health there or something, so it gets pretty rough. I should mention a few of the things that are necessary for healing. This is just a severely stressful fight for healing, although I think it's kind of fun. But you'll find a lot of situations when you're learning this where any given raid member gets killed by a flame scythe, and you swear that they're high enough health, and then you look at the log and it turns out, well, they were, they had overkill damage of like 200 out of 150,000 total or something. So it's just a severe razor's edge margin in many cases. But again, it's required because you need so many people to be out for concentration stacks in order to beat the DPS check and blah blah blah. So a lot of the healing comes down to managing your personal cooldowns as a healer, figuring out really how you can maximize your healing output, especially in AE. So a lot of it was sort of group setups for us. We have a full group of soakers for our priest healer. We have a shadow priest who's also in the group to help with the healing there. We have our shaman throwing down healing rains when the stacks get pretty high. As a druid, actually I should mention this orb phase first, so hold that thought. So the orbs are pretty damaging, simply because they have a stacking buff, but more importantly, it goes up really high really quickly on heroic. So we messed with a lot of setups, but it ultimately decided that it was better to use our tank and another melee to soak one of the orbs. And by doing this, it basically eliminates 50% of the possible leap targets that would be soaking orbs normally. So if you look where Majordomo is, our tank is right now soaking the orb, and he's transitioning with our Death Knight. And then myself and our Paladin healer are grabbing the other orb. So basically, because he will not leap to targets that are not casters, then our main tank and our other melee that are soaking that one orb are never going to be in danger of being leapt on. So it's a lot easier basically to heal. It's more stable. That said, if you do get a leap on you and you have stacks from the orbs, it's very dangerous. So what we sort of decided upon that worked pretty well was to save our instant heals for the people that are potential leap targets that are also soaking stacks. Other than that, you just transition every 4 stacks from the Burning Orb buff, and it's not too bad. So anyway, we're back into Scorpion. This is our 4th Scorpion. And I should mention we used Bloodlust on the start of the 3rd Scorpion, and this is just to maximize the buff duration while people have high concentration before that first Flame Scythe. But, you know, you can adjust it as necessary. So, 4th Scorpion, we have everyone stacked because the Scythe damage is too high if anyone is standing out. And at this point, it's just kind of a matter of survival. I don't think we go to 9 stacks. I'm certain we don't, actually. Because the healing is pretty severe at this point. We're all getting low on mana. So instead, you just kind of go as long as possible, and then you have to finish them off in the next cat phase. So I was going to mention a few tips for Druid healing on this. One big thing is that early on, before Flame Scythes get very frequent, you can utilize pre-hotting to take advantage of the concentration buff. So often what you'll see is I will use Efflorescence on the main tank just before the first Flame Scythe, and then because Efflorescence has the initial heal from Swiftmend and then the secondary heal, it actually double dips. Any effect on this fight that has 2 basic effects to it will double dip in the buff. So it's really strong for things like Atonement healing, Shadow Priest healing, you know, double heals like Efflorescence I mentioned, things like that are really strong. That said, once the Flame Scythes get more frequent, you just can't handle it anymore. So you see we transitioned at the 7th Fury on that Scorpion. That was pretty solid. And then other things for Druid healing on the Scorpion are maximize your cooldown. So I use Trank for one Scorp, and then I'll use Tree of Life for the other one. Make sure you use your 15% haste buff, you know, when it's necessary. And of course, recast your hots early if you can afford to, and you know the targets that are going to be Flame Scythed. Other than that, of course, keep your Swiftmend and Wild Growth on cooldown. And Tree of Life, you really can't afford to utilize it for mana regen by using Life Blooms like you normally would, because Life Bloom healing is just not strong enough at that point. So you really have to use Tree of Life and then Rejuve and Wild Growth spam instead. Yeah, so it's a pretty challenging fight. I think this kill was around 9 minutes and 40 seconds. So we beat the Berserk by 20 or so. But as I said, once gear improves, eventually you'll have a healer be capable of staying out for 100% concentration. And that bonus will just make healing a lot more stable. But anyway, that is for Majordomo Staghelm. So good luck and thanks for watching.